Well, Mustafa Sheikh joins us now, a criminal defense lawyer. So let's talk about the judgments today, because we had two different judgments across the country today. Mosque shooting and also here in Toronto, the Bruce McArthur. Both judges had to deliberate over life sentences and what the minimum or what the parole eligibility should be. So in Bruce McArthur's case, we had the minimum, which I think caught a lot of people off guard, but the judge essentially justifying his decision, talking about age. What do you think about that? Does that bring some justice? Do you think it answers all the concerns that Torontonians may have?
See, I think it's important to note that in both circumstances, actually, there's a lot more similarities than people notice, because ultimately both of these guys are getting life sentences, right? You're only eligible for parole after 25 years. In Bruce McArthur's situation, Justice McMahon made it clear that ultimately this gentleman is going to be eligible for parole after 91, when he turns 91. I think that was a very big key factor in that determination. More importantly, it's important to note right now that the parole board is pretty serious. So a lot of lawyers have come out, especially if you look at the facts before us, he's not going to be eligible for parole. So the judge was pretty confident that even though he will be eligible for parole after 25 years, the chances of him being actually released are slim to none.
Okay, but it does happen, right? And it has happened with murderers in the past where they can get out. I mean, that is part of the system.
Absolutely, but if you read the judgment in particular based on the heinous crimes, the fact that the judge also made it clear that Mr. McArthur was morally bankrupt, I feel like if you look at that judgment in its clarity, the fact that he poses such a risk to the public if he was released, again, it would be very, very highly unlikely that this gentleman will ever be released from prison again.
And I guess for the public, it's difficult to understand justice. And how do we define justice? So a lot of people define justice emotionally,
yes,
and say that, well, he should have been in for 150 years, not just the 25.
And that's fair, because ultimately, depending on what side you sit on or how you're actually personally involved in the case, justice means different things to different people.
And they see the U.S.
Absolutely,
where sentences are 200, 250 years, and it just keeps going.
You're right, and in my humble opinion, the U.S. is draconian, right? We don't want to follow the U.S.'s footsteps. I think that's what makes Canada so unique, that we have a democratic process. We have the Canadian Charter of Rights, where we have a system in play that ensures that people get the justice that they deserve based on the judges. The judges in these cases both have discretion, where based on the facts before him, they can craft a sentence that makes sense based on, again, the circumstances that are at play.
Right, and let's talk about the Quebec situation here, where the judge said 40 years, and he said that 50 years or more would constitute cruel and unusual punishment. And in this case, Alexandre Bissonnette is 29 years old.
Yes.
So there is a chance that he could get parole.
Of course.
And in 25 years, I mean, he'll still be fairly young.
You're right. And ultimately, though, you got to ask yourself again, it's important that the general public remembers that one of the fundamental principles in sentencing is rehabilitation. If we don't believe in that, then what do we believe in? It's important to always give somebody a benefit of the doubt. Our system isn't based on vengeance. It's about retribution and making sure that, you know, we look at each and every case on an individual basis. And
so
when we don't...
Is it a different circumstance than if you kill a police officer? And again, in Toronto, we have the killer of Todd Bayless, who is coming up for parole. He wants to be released. And again, people are saying, well, you know, maybe he served his time and he should get out. Although, obviously, police members feel very differently about that. And maybe members of the public do, because he killed a police officer.
It's important to never rubber stamp anything. The day that we start doing that, we're going to find out that there's going to be a lot of issues before the court system. It's important to let the system sort of play its role. And right now, there's nothing to believe or suggest that our criminal justice system isn't working or failing anybody. So until then, we have to let the system play its role. We have to give the judges the discretion that they currently have available. And as things currently stand, we don't know if he's going to be granted parole. And it's important to remember the parole hearing is very, very serious. It's a 4-part test. They're going to help to make sure that the person doesn't pose a risk. So for whatever reason, if they believe after that hearing that this person is still dangerous, they're not going to get released.
Right. There's so much variance with sentencing, though, and it's up to judges. And only 3 people in Canadian history, after the law change, have been sentenced to 75 years. Dylan Millard being one of them. That's a familiar name in Toronto. So how do Canadians reconcile that? Because obviously there was a political impetus for changing the law and allowing consecutive sentences, but yet we're seeing sentences very varied. And we have Dylan Millard, we have Bruce MacArthur, and we have Alexandre Bissonnette, who all receive very different sentences today.
And I think that's what makes our criminal justice system unique. Again, I'm just stating the same thing. We don't have that rubber stamp approach. The judge needs to look at the particular circumstances of the individual, look at the actual offense at play, and then craft a sentence that makes sense under those circumstances. And victim input is always a big deal.
All right. Well, thank you for coming in. Appreciate you joining us.